Aloha and welcome. In this chapter, we're going to be talking about secure application development. Specifically, in this section, we're going to be talking about application environments, provisioning, and version control. So, first of all, we're going to talk about environments. So, what is an environment? Environment's the collection of hardware and software used to build an application. This environment may include the hardware resources, the servers, the desktops, the mobile devices, can include your software tools, your IDEs, which is known as an integrated development environment, and your debugging and performance evaluation utilities, things that you use for quality control, QA, quality assurance. So we talk about four specific environments that we use. The first one is a dev environment, your development environment. That's where you're going to be doing your application creation, your debugging, your modifications, and your improvements that you're going to be doing. Then you have what we call the test environment, and that's a environment that you're going to be testing the application and making sure that it meets the specification requirements. Then you've got what we call a staging environment or stage. That's the pre-production environment that mirrors the production environment. So it's almost like testing it in a real world, but it's got your data. It's got maybe it's got a bit of the data, but not everything in there. It could contain uh, basically synthetic data, things that you make up that test out the functionality without actually using the real data. And this is going to contain the final release version of the application. And the staging environment's used for testing the installation, the configuration, and the migration scripts and the procedures. Because when you're taking a piece of software and you're moving into your production environment, you need to go through everything to make sure that when you do move everything over, that there's no hiccups. You want to make sure that your data, if you have to migrate data, that it's able to move over cleanly. You don't want any kinds of hiccups where you're going to corrupt the data in the new environment or things like that. So you want to make sure that you can hammer out all these things for for the installation part and making sure your configuration, if there's any changes, the changes are made. Make sure that the migration scripts that pull your data and move it over, make sure that that gets off without hitch. So then the last one that we have here is the production environment. That's known as prod, or sometimes we call it a live environment. And that's where the release version of the application is deployed. And that's where everybody uses the application, your production environment, prod. There's one other thing. It's not going to be on the test, but it's something that you'll find in the real world. Sometimes you have something called a UAT, and the UAT is the user acceptance testing. So often you'll have like a UAT environment that you have your users come in and actually work on the thing to make sure that it meets all those specifications. And I guess in the system, the four that we talk about here, that could be either the test environment. That would probably be the testing environment, maybe an advanced form of that. Sometimes when you do a test environment, it's just going to be the people that work on the testing team in smaller organizations where you don't have a separation of roles like that. Sometimes this isn't a good practice, but sometimes the people that make the software are also the ones that test it, just out of necessity. So the UAT would be a form of test environment where you're actually having users of the system, probably people that had something to do with the requirements themselves. They'll come in there and make sure that the functionality that they expect and the results that they expect, are fully covered in your development there. Then we have quality assurance, QA. That's the process of testing an application's various aspects, including the stability, the usability, the security, the functionality, and performance to make sure that it meets the user requirements. Because when you're developing software, you always start with user requirements. You gather your user requirements. What is it that they need? What is it that they expect? What are the boundaries that you're working with? And then you want to do quality assurance to make sure that you've met those. The next part we're going to talk about is provisioning, code signing, and version control. So provisioning, what is provisioning? Well, that's the process of taking your application and moving it into the production environment. And you're going to customize the application's configurations in the process. So that could include creating users. Let's say you're moving something over and you need a certain type of user over there. It could be settings permission, setting your permissions for different roles. It could be modifying the application appearance. Sometimes when I work in a testing environment, I'll have like a different coloring scheme to let me know that, hey, I am in the testing environment here. And when you move it over into the production, you may have a different appearance to it to let you know for sure that, hey, this is not a testing environment, this is a live environment, be careful. So during the provisioning process, you may do something called code signing. Code signing is when you're going to digitally sign the software by the software's publisher. This is going to confirm your identity so that people know that the software has not been modified or corrupted since it was signed off on. And then we have a reverse of the provisioning process called deprovisioning. That's going to be the process of removing an application from a production environment. This is important because a lot of people think about the provisioning part and they make sure that they can put it all in there, but they don't give a lot of thought into how do you remove all that functionality if the need comes to just pull it all. So that's going to be just as important, and it's something to think about because you'll want to know to, hey, we need to remove these users. These users aren't necessary because if you leave a user in the system that isn't necessary because the application has disappeared, you've got a vulnerability there. You also want to change your configurations and things like that, as well when you're deprovisioning. So you want to think about all the things that you're doing that are new or changing existing settings when you're going through, the deprovisioning process. So know how to get everything into production, also know how to remove it all. We also have something called software versioning. Software versioning is referring to the version of the software that you're using. The example they give here is Microsoft. Microsoft, starting with, I think it was Windows 10, or well, when you look at the Windows 10 operating system versions, you'll have something like YYH1 or YYH2. The YY is the year, and the H1 or H2 just refers to the first half or the second half of the year. When you're using software, you'll see that there are software versions out there. And the software versioning, we use something called version control, sometimes called source control, and that's the practice of tracking and managing a software's versions. So as you add functionality, usually minor functionality, you'll wrap up into a decimal. Like, let's say you have, for example, the Python programming language. I think it's on 3.8 now. So if you have 3.8 and then you have some minor revisions to it, you'll come out with a 3.8 something. It'll change just a little bit. But when you have a very new version, when you have a large version change, usually that, will change the main number. Let's say you go to, from 3.8, you may go to 4.0, something like that. So that usually when you're going up a large number like that, that's a major step. Minor steps are going to be those small decimal changes between it, like Web 2.0, Web 3.0. Those are large, increments in functionality. So just keep that in mind. So that's it for this chapter. So going back to cover things, when we're doing things, we do these things in environments. When we're creating software, we do it in environments which contains all the hardware, the software that we're going to use for this, our development tools, our quality assurance tools. We've got our dev environment, we've got our test environment, we've got our staging environment, and we've got our production environment. We've got quality assurance QA that's used to make sure that our stuff works the way it's supposed to and meets the requirements. We also have provisioning, which is all the steps that you do, like adding users and setting permissions and everything, and changing configurations when you're putting stuff into production, and that includes code signing. Then we have the opposite when we're pulling it out. We're deprovisioning. We need to know the steps to go through to get everything out. And we've got software versioning, which is the versions of the software that are currently in use. So you can see, oh, that person's on this version as opposed to this version. Often when you're talking about, let's say you're having problems with Chrome or something, you need to look up and see what version of Chrome you're using just to make sure that you've got the latest one. So you can go in there and look at the version. So anyway, that's the chapter. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out and I'd be happy to help. Aloha.